Welcome everyone to the second round of the Open of Sevilla 2026. Um, the second round was against a better, a higher rated opponent, rated 2040. The previous round was against 1800. That's usually the way these opens go. Um, you know, every round you get paired with someone better until eventually you get paired with someone that is above your rating. That's usually how it goes, but of course there's some variance there. But okay, for this game, I saw that he played the Knight Orf, and I decided to play a line that I like quite a lot, which is this line with Rook G1. So I'm getting through the opening kind of quickly. Okay, this is the starting position of the so-called Knight Orf variation of the Sicilian defense. And basically every move under the sun has been tried here on the sixth move for white. It's kind of a joke actually. Like the kinds of moves that are possible here, even like h4, a4 have been played. And a couple of years ago, this idea with Rook G1 came to life. Maybe it was like Niepomniachtchi or someone that popularized this. I don't know. But this has its venom as most sidelines do, and it's even better if you catch your opponent off guard. So what most people have been doing against me is going for the main line, which is this endgame, which is which arises pretty forcibly after bishop e6, g4, d5, and now we trade everything on d5. So this is the main line because black in the Sicilians, it's like a rule of thumb that if black plays d5 and it's good, then he's doing all right. And it's pretty much no different here. Black is doing all right, but this endgame has its peculiarities and there's some ideas to play for white. So instead of this, if you're interested, like with the black pieces, there's a lot of choice. You can go knight c6, you can go b5, which is the computer's top move. You can go g6, e6. Also here, if you want to stop g4, you can go h5. So there's a lot of choice if you don't want to go into the endgame. But the endgame is completely fine, but black should know a thing or two. And overall, I think that it's pretty much risk-free. Well, in a higher chess sense, I mean, assuming that both players are going to play, you know, assuming that white is going to play relatively well, the endgame does not carry a lot of risk. So, okay, bishop e3, knight c6, c3. And black usually is going for long castles in these positions, and the reason for that is that, well, without queens, there isn't uh, that much of a risk to like for white to create an attack. And the king is just closer to these pawns on the queen side, which can become weak in the future. So this is the main line. But my opponent decided to go for a short castle, so he played bishop e7 and short castles. Now, one curious thing about this endgame is that the pawn on g4 is actually a great asset to white's position because it sort of clamps down on black's kingside majority. So if black ever goes h5, we go g5, and it just sort of slows down black from going f5. Also, if black goes g6 to prepare f5, we usually go g5 to again clamp that structure. So yeah, white is playing along the light squares mainly, so it makes sense to go knight d2 here and bishop c4. So trade off these bishops. This is what happened in the game. So he castled bishop c4, and he played rook d8. Around here, I was taking my time. It's never good to play moves quickly just because they look natural. You should always try to find, try to calculate, a minimal amount, try to find some uh, specific ideas in the position. So for example, here I was also considering whether or not to include a4, because basically after bishop c4, I wasn't sure whether he should go b5 or not. Eventually, I thought that I would just play knight b6, king e2, and I wanted to play rook d1 and knight d5. I wasn't so sure whether black should be going for something direct like this or not. When you're playing, when you're playing below your rating, you're always a bit more worried that the position simplifies itself too much. So these kinds of things come to mind. But overall, I think that white can just leave the pawn on c3, um, or also push c4, which is something that I didn't think a lot during the game. But then I was analyzing the game with a friend, and he suggested this. And yeah, black probably shouldn't be playing, shouldn't be forcing matters this much. But b5 here could be interesting, just not to go b4 later. So I was considering a4 here as well. What I didn't like about a4 was this move knight b6, knight a5, which basically stops, just prevents this bishop c4 idea. And black is aiming to trade off the knight, where then he gets he keeps the light squared bishops. So, what white really wants to achieve is to trade off these bishops. But I don't want to concede too much by doing that, and I feel like this move bishop g2 is a little bit too slow because now the rook is misplaced here on g2, and black goes rook c8 and goes knight c4, and I feel like the position is again simplifying itself too much. So eventually I went for this bishop c4. Okay, rook d8. Now, yeah, now I want to go king e2 and rook d1. But first, I thought for a while, and I decided to go for this idea with bishop b6, which I think, which I think was quite nice, at least in a practical sense. So it forces him to go rook d7, and now the point is that I just prevent these ideas with b5, also the ideas with knight a5. So I'm just trying to squeeze his play as much as possible. So now I went for king e2. And one of my main ideas is that, well, against bishop d8, which is sort of what makes sense in the position because black is trying to, free himself a little bit. I had two ideas. My original idea was just to drop the bishop back to e3 and try to steal the file from him like this. I think b5 here is just a mistake because it will allow me to get the file, like some rook to d1. I can also go a4, but probably some rook to d1, and then knight e4 or knight b3. And I'm probably getting the file, or then I'll also get this hook on b5, and I'll go a4. So this structure, actually, it's kind of insightful that this structure in the Sicilian, black goes a6, b5 a lot of the times, but in the endgames, this can be quite harmful because the pawn on b5 is very weak, and then if the a file opens, the pawn on a6 is also quite weak. So this structure is quite dangerous for black in the endgame. Okay, so this was one idea, but then I also saw this one with rook takes uh, with bishop takes d5 and knight c4. This also seemed quite promising because he cannot trade the bishops due to this fork to the rooks. And again, I'm just trying to steal the file from him. And I thought here, I basically couldn't find a reasonable defense for him against just rook d1 and getting the file. Of course, like I'm not winning the game immediately if I get the file, but I thought that it was an important, a crucial feature in the position. Okay, so he didn't go for bishop d8, he went king f8, which surprised me a bit, and I don't think it's the best move, or like the best idea. I went rook d1. Actually, let me remember if I played bishop takes first. or rook d1. I believe I traded the bishops first, if I'm not mistaken. Um, it could have been the other way around, but it will lead to the same position. King e8, rook a d1. Now I was pretty much expecting rook d7 to at least try to get the king to e6. This is like one of black's main problems, like the king being a little bit passive on e6. And as we'll see, white has ideas later to enter with the king on the light squares. So if, for example, black ever is able to get the king to e6, this is immediately just fine for him, right? And now, yeah, he can try to go g6 and f5 and so on, and white really has nothing here. Even though we have the file, there's no entrance squares, and yeah, if black gets the king to e6, it's completely fine. But he traded on d1, which was probably not so precise, and he played rook c8. Now, yeah, the knight is loose on c4, so we have to watch out for some ideas with knight d4 or knight b4, but okay, I calculated a bit and I just went king f3. So yeah, one of the reasons why I like this endgame is that white has very clear plans. One of the hidden ideas, so to speak, is that often trading pieces actually favors white, because if my king gets to d5, like let's say we trade the rooks in this position, and my king gets to d5, the endgame is probably winning. It's probably completely winning. Um, and so that makes black's life harder, right? He cannot just try to trade pieces and cruise his way to a draw. Okay, so he played f6, introducing the idea of knight d4. Well, in some moment at least. And I played king e4. But now uh, the game actually like I started to feel like the momentum was shifting too much, because I believe I started missing some things here. First of all, I spent a lot of time on this move because, well, it feels natural, but I was a bit hesitant about either knight b8 or knight d8, and he comes around with the knight. Eventually, he went knight b8. And the thing is that, well, one thing is that I don't want to go b3, because even though it stabilizes the knight, like temporarily, the problem is that after knight d7, um, like he's getting to the c3 pawn, most likely, because if I remove the bishop, he goes b5, and if I don't, he takes the bishop. And yeah, I didn't like this. For example, rook d3 I saw, and then bishop c5. Maybe even has something better. Oh yeah, just rook takes c4. So yeah, this is just impossible. So b3 actually seems to stabilize the position, but fails to do so. So then my original idea, my first idea, was to go knight e3 and knight d5. And I was not really concerned with the exchange of the bishop for the knight at all. I felt like that was beneficial for me. But the point is that he then I spotted this sequence where he gives a check. Now he trades. He gives a check on f4. It's pretty forcing. I have to defend the pawn, and he finally gets bishop c5. And I'm losing the f2 pawn. Um, and so this definitely cannot be good, and it's pretty bad. So okay, I missed this annoying detail, which makes my life a bit harder. Eventually, I went for knight a5, and yeah, uh, the computer also says this is a mistake. So this is the moment in the game where actually I let a lot of the advantage slip, or even all of it. So yeah, knight d6 probably is the critical move. Knight d6, and I just didn't think that this endgame was that dangerous. but I think I was wrong because let's say like king e7. I believe what I mainly missed is that we have king d5, right? And the king, my pieces are a bit stuck, and my king uh, is all the way up the board, but it works concretely, right? Because black has no checks and no way to exploit it. Um, and yeah, I'll just start creating threats. If knight d7, I can probably bring the bishop back, uh, or just push the pawns, and black is basically stuck, even though, my pieces are hanging on by a thread, but there's no way to exploit it. So this was definitely the way to go. I basically discarded it because I didn't see king d5, or I didn't seriously consider it, and I just thought that some endgame like this should be fine for black. Um, and I'm not really getting anywhere with the bishop against the knight. Again, he goes g6 f5, and he's fine. But I missed this idea with king d5, which is very strong. So what I ended up going for is knight a5, but I didn't like this at all, and neither does the computer. Because now I have to go bishop e3, b6, and I have to go knight b3. And my knight is in a pretty bad square now. It doesn't really have any useful routes to try and improve itself. And yeah, thankfully here my opponent just went completely wrong in the next couple of moves. And the game will actually finish very soon, which is unexpected. I believe what he should have went for is a5 here and tried to create counterplay with a4 and then a3. This would have been very annoying. I would have went knight d2, and against a4, I'd probably have to go a3 myself, because otherwise he goes a3 and just destroys my structure and gets a lot of activity and targets. So I would have probably went a3 myself, and yeah, I'm still not so sure about this position. I mean, I don't think it's that easy for black. White often just has ideas of going king d5 actually. And again, the king, is sort of asking to get mated, but it's also the king is also an incredibly good piece in the endgames, and if the king can get close to the pawns, then it just it becomes too strong. So I don't think it's also that easy for black. But yeah, a5 was definitely the way to go. One important thing is that against a5, I often have this idea of playing a4, but here I just thought it didn't work, because the idea is that I sacrifice one or two pawns in order to gain a lot of activity with the king. But what I was calculating was something like this, and I thought that here these two pawns were just too much, right? And something like this would not be sufficient. Like he goes a4, and I don't know, he just does something like a3, and this is not enough. But we can actually draw a comparison to the game, because he played rook c6, which is just very passive. Um, and I guess he didn't want my king to enter, because now he has rook d6. Um, okay, I didn't have that much time, so I just made a move that I felt like was not best, but at least it created some it enabled some idea for me, which was h3. So, it's also a passive move. I'm literally just defending the pawn, but now I will introduce this idea of going a4, right? If it's my move right now, I'll probably play a4, and I'm happy to sacrifice one pawn to get the king in, but probably not two, right? As we saw in the other variation, giving up the g4 pawn is too much. So here, if he played a5, yeah, I would have went for a4, which is important, right? Because I stop him from going a4 himself, and this way he cannot create counterplay, and I feel like his structure is still a bit problematic in the long run. And now if we go for the same line, I feel like this is very dangerous for black. some position like this, I wasn't sure whether I was winning here. Like I wasn't sure if I was better or if it was just a draw. But I did think that this was the way to go, and my position just looked very pleasant here with the knight hopping to c4 or e4. So yeah, even so, he probably should have went for that. But as I said, the game ended rather abruptly because he played knight c5, which is just a huge, huge mistake. Well, it's pretty much a game-losing blunder because I take, and now, well, I'm actually really surprised with the evaluation that the computer is giving. But yeah, if he takes with the pawn, then this is just strategically lost, or so I thought, because I bring the knight around to c4, and that's pretty much over. Okay, now I'm really interested in knowing what the computer wants to play, because I thought this was just done. Okay, he wants rook c7. I don't really see the big difference. Okay, he just says that this is not so lost, but yeah, I did think that something like this couldn't really be a draw. But I guess the computer does miracles. Um, yeah. Anyways, like no one really goes for that. The position just looks horrendous, like the knight versus the bishop. Yeah, but this wasn't his idea. He took with the bishop, but this loses sort of, um, you know, um, directly because I trade. He took with the rook, and now I get rook d6. Yeah, if it takes with the pawn, again, the king is just a really important piece in the endgames. I'm going king d5, and some position like this is completely winning because his king is cut off, and yeah, I'll just grab the pawn, and he can never trade rooks. Obviously, like king and pawn endgames, when you're a pawn up, are winning like 99% of the times. He took with the rook. This allows rook d6, and again, this is just completely winning. Um, but his idea from afar was to go rook b5 here, which just fails completely to b4, and now his rook is trapped, right? So it's kind of nice. King e7, rook d1, and he resigned because the rook is just trapped. So even if he tries to get it out with a5, I will ignore it and go a4. So he resigned. Yeah, instead, well, I don't think there's really much to play for, but if rook c4 check, I have a very pleasant choice between king e6, which should be winning, but it would force me to calculate a bit, like again, king activity and rook activity is everything in the endgame, so this intuitively just sort of must be winning, but I would have to calculate that out a bit. Instead, I have the safer option with king e3, and then just, for example, like, let's say some position like this, rook b6 and then rook b7, and still I thought that this was just tremendously good for white. Okay, so in any case, the game ended like this. I guess tactics really are 99% of chess. And yeah, this variation is nice. Like this endgame has some venom. I would recommend you to see that if you like grinding out these sort of small advantage endgames. But yeah, it's kind of funny that this move rook g1, which actually is called the freak attack, and the idea is so caveman-like to go g4, g5 and attack. It's kind of funny that the main line immediately leads to this sort of small advantage endgame. Okay, anyways, that was it for round two, and yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow with another recap. Bye.